Good to be here. So by way of background, my name is James MacGregor. I'm a partner at a company called Forcyd, which is an e-discovery, cyber forensics and document review provider. I've been in the legal technology space now for probably 10 to 12 years. Worked in the US originally, and I've been over this side of the Atlantic now for the last 7 or 8. Our panel discussion today is going to be around trends in legal technology, in the legal technology sphere in the upcoming year, and I'll let the 2 panelists introduce themselves one after the other. Dan, would you like to go first?
Sure, yes. Hi, I'm Dan Katz. I wear 2 hats in life. One is I'm a professor at Chicago Kent College of Law, which is the law school of Illinois Institute of Technology. I also have I previously founded a legal tech startup, which I exited in 2018, and I started a new company a few months ago called 273 Ventures. So both kind of in the academy and in the industrial sector.
Great, thanks so much. And Zach, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so Zach Posner, partner and co-founder of the Legal Tech Fund, and we also have an event that we just put on called the TLTF Summit. But in general, we are investing in technologies that are transforming the world of law. We formally came to the world as a fund in late 2021. We've made 35 investments across the globe and are extremely excited about the ecosystem.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, so we're going to have a Q&A format at the end, but if any of you listening would like to submit questions as we go or add comments, please feel free to do so in the chat feature via Zoom. Right, I guess first question to submit to both panelists, and Zach, I'll start with you if I may. What would you say are the most prevalent trends that you're seeing in the legal tech sphere at the moment?
Well, I mean, at the moment, everything is centered around AI and ChatGPT. I think that I think that they created something that that demos spectacularly well, and I think that iterations of it are getting better and better for actual usage. But the demo is so strong that everybody's asking about it, everybody's thinking about it, everybody's trying to figure out what they should be doing with it. So that would probably be the strongest one that I'm seeing. If that's what we're seeing externally, and then internally we have a lot of theses that we're thinking about.
Okay, great. Dan, could you perhaps give everyone on the call a bit of an overview in terms of the recent paper that you published around ChatGPT and its capabilities?
Sure. Yeah, we've been working with large language models for a while now, both in the academic context. So we have a paper from back in 2021 that was presented at the ACL conference, main conference, which is like in the kind of NLP world, probably one of the best conferences. Bunch of these large language model papers, the first paper was sort of went into the ACL conference. So we've been working on it for a while, and we've seen kind of increasing capabilities kind of in the general models. And so obviously there's been a lot of hoopla since the mass public was made of, had this as Zach noted, this kind of very compelling demo that they can use and touch. And so they're getting a feel for that. What we wanted to try to do is assess the capabilities on a sort of task that everybody would have some familiarity with in the legal sector, which is the bar exam, which is of course not the end all be all of what lawyers do, but it is, to take the test requires some ability to really confront legalese in a serious way. And the questions are kind of really pedantic at times and require real like nuanced hair splitting in terms of like, there's a right answer, but there's actually a better answer than another one that's right. So there's, that kind of thing going on. And so we took not ChatGPT, but the industrial version, which is through the API, which is kind of called GPT 3.5. And applied it to the bar exam, the multiple choice part of the bar exam. We can talk about the essays later on if you want. And I think we showed that in this kind of rigorous kind of evaluation, we've seen material improvements in the quality. Now it does not pass the overall MBE, but it does well in a couple of it does quite well in 2 of the areas. And kind of matches humans in a third of the 7 topical areas. And so I think it's illustrative of the increase in quality that we're seeing in large language models. I think the open question is, how do you project that general capabilities into domain-specific problems like law, medicine, finance, any of these domains where there's a lexicon or a language that is quite complex, and certainly legal language is notoriously complex. And so the question is still open, is, you know, how and in what ways will people carry through these general advances to, like, in our field, in the legal field. That's why it's going to be a very interesting year, though, I think 2023 as that unfolds. So that's at least the shorthand of what we did.
Great, thank you. And absolutely, I want to come to your perspectives in terms of what this new technology might unleash or make available to the legal profession. But I guess for context, what might be helpful is, can you talk through what's enabled this technology, or what's led to the sudden exponential advancement of this type of artificial intelligence in, you know, the last 12 months or so, as opposed to former AI models that existed previously?
Sorry, is that to me or to Zach?
Yeah, down to you, please.
We've had a confluence of several things come together. The transformer architecture, which is kind of in the core of this generation of large language models. Well, let me take a step back. If you've noticed the quality of video games and how much more immersive and amazing they are, if you look back, like when I was a kid, you play like 8-bit Nintendo, and, you know, you sort of look at like what a video game is like now. It's like incredible. And what's powering that are these graphics cards, these graphics units. And these graphics units, people realized, what facilitates this incredibly immersive environment also could be connected to other things, including like analyzing protein folding and stuff like this. But also people realized you could use it to analyze language, and you could build these very massive language models where you take a bunch of curated data and you run it through this transformer architecture, which parallelizes, that means like break the task into lots of constituent components, and then run it on many of these GPUs at once. And that was really kind of the breakthrough, is, you know, we've had the internet, we have all this curated text that you can get and you can clean up and make available, and many other data sources, but it's really the breakthrough on the transformer architecture and these graphics, combined with these graphics cards to parallelize everything, which allows you to have these really massive language models. And certainly by the end of the year, we'll have even larger ones. Now, there's going to be some upper limit to what's possible because, well, first of all, entropy exists. So that's kind of one, but two, just getting more text isn't necessarily better if it's not adding to performance. And we can talk about why more doesn't always work better, but more, as you go like orders of magnitude up and more, it does tend to be better, but there is a ceiling here anyway.
Great, thank you. Zach, maybe you could shed some light in terms of investor activity, and alongside ChatGPT, are there other types of similar advancements being funded by some of the big tech players? What does the market look like in terms of this development of AI? Zach, you're muted.
Yeah, so I think that we're still learning, I think, with everybody else. I think that I think this is one of those technologies. I think it was Bezos that had a famous line, and he said, people overestimate what can happen in 1 year, and they underestimate what can happen in 10 years with technology. And I think that's exactly where we are with this type of technology. I mean, every iteration of AI, you know, or anything along, anything similar, it's every couple of years the models get better and better and better for a ton of different reasons. Dan just described, you know, what could have been responsible for these, for this most recent instance. So we've looked at a lot of these general AI tools and said, you know, if it's going to take you a couple years to craft it, you know, for a specific market, you know, in this case, legal, you know, are you better off making that investment now, or are you better off, or is the entrepreneur 3 years later that starts a company and gets to benefit from everything that Amazon offers now for, you know, a penny a second on their web services platform? Are you better off starting later? And so I think that the question is really, this stuff has always been out there, and it's when you start making bets. From our end, I think the most exciting thing is not necessarily new companies that are being formed around this right now, but how this is being used to augment existing software. You know, and that's where I get, because I think from a new companies, I think, you know, Dan's probably played around with the next generation more than I have, but what you're hearing about 3.5, what you're hearing about 4.0 are just orders of magnitude. I mean, they're just like significant advances compared to where we are now. So we've seen a couple companies pop up from scratch saying, hey, we're just using ChatGPT to do certain things. But then what gets us really interesting are what are the companies that have a little bit of traction, have a little bit of distribution, and how are they augmenting this into their platform? How do they make their experience a little bit better for users? You know, I was talking to a company yesterday, and they have structured data about court cases, and they're using ChatGPT to say, can you summarize these cases? And because of the data they have and the way that it kind of spoon feeds it, it does a spectacular job of summarizing. So, you know, I think that it's certainly one thread that we're looking at right now. I think there's two other things in the back of our mind. You're just starting to see some interesting things pop up in Arizona and Utah, where in the US, we've kind of changed some laws, or there's some sandboxes going that basically give a little bit of flexibility as to who can practice law or who can participate in the ownership of a law firm. And I think you guys are a little bit more forward thinking in the UK and in Australia about some of this stuff, but in the US, we're just getting started. So you're going to see, there's going to be some interesting businesses that pop up there. And then I think the third thing in the category that we're probably most focused on is kind of how legal gets integrated into business solutions, and it kind of legal almost like fades in the background, where what used to be, you know, contract automation really looks more like a sales enablement tool right now, you know, to enable your sales team. But if the sales enablement uses certain types of technology, well, you structure everything that you need for the legal end user. And maybe that kind of changes roles and responsibilities a little bit of kind of what and how people, people work on these days. So those are kind of three concepts that we're thinking about a lot.
Great, thanks. Dan, I suppose to borrow and follow that thought, assuming that the expectations by people as to what's going to happen in the next 12 months might be too far, and in the next 10 years actually probably too low, what do you think? I mean, the court summary judgment was a good example, but what do you think the legal profession could use this functionality for immediately, and potentially where could it go in the future?
Well, I definitely agree with the point that let's say the existing or legacy players in this space many of them will get to continue. The question for them is, how do you embed some component? Say you have 7 steps in some software product, 2 of those this technology is relevant for. How are you going to connect and embed this class of technology, these large language models, not just GPT, but many of the others that'll come to market? How do you evaluate them and figure out how to connect them to what you're already doing? And I think some will do that better than others, and that will probably be a dimension of competition. I think a lot of, just from like kind of the people I know, a lot of people are scrambling to figure it out because this caught them a little bit flat-footed in the sense that, they're like, oh yeah, I know these language models, they're coming up, but they're not really ready yet. And then all of a sudden they got a chance to sort of see these kind of public demonstrations, and all their customers are asking them like, hey, what are you going to get any of that in the software I use every day? Because I'd like some of that. And so, between those two things, I guess, for those of us who work in this area, I want to just thank OpenAI for bringing this into the zeitgeist for everybody, because it was already true before they did this public display. But I think it's very clear to people now that this is a material kind of change in the technology landscape in terms of, particularly language. If you think about kind of the waves of legal technology, there's been a moat around this field, which is language is the coin of the realm in law. And language models have been very poor, frankly, at working with legal language, and people have done a bunch of clever things and hacky things to kind of work on certain use cases, but we haven't had a really frontal assault on legal language, and this is a lot closer to that. And so that's why I kind of think this is of a different nature. Of course, we've had kind of hype cycles of AI in general and in legal, several of them. But this is the first time we're talking about a more frontal assault on legal language. And almost every task in law leads to language or a document. Not everyone, but the vast majority of them lead to some document kind of interaction. So I do think that's kind of an interesting difference that people should, kind of keep in mind.
Yeah, and I mean, Dan, I don't know if you've seen anything. I don't know that I've seen anything like this where a company did such a good job of getting a demo out there and into people's hands to touch it and play with it, because, everybody's asking quite, you can see it, you can touch it. Like, I feel like every other iteration in legal tech are just, these theories that people are talking about, and then maybe a company has a specific demo, but this is like, really one of the most spectacular product launches that I've seen for something.
Yeah, and this is not obviously going to go unanswered. Within 12 months, we will have, 5 other of these kind of brought to market that'll have, in my view, differential capabilities. So one of the important things would be say, well, the Google model versus the Amazon model versus sort of the OpenAI / Microsoft. I mean, we should just call it Microsoft now, right? It's not really a separate company. But you can look at the waterfall analysis for that. But anyway, Microsoft / OpenAI. We've seen this before, of course. There are other smart companies, and they're not just gonna let OpenAI have carte blanche on this topic, because they've already been working on it. This is kind of amazing thing. I mean, Google, the transformer architecture wasn't developed by OpenAI. Obviously, like you said, I mean, they brought an amazing product launch that really, kudos again to them for really, I think I saw ChatGPT cross Kardashian as like a top search topic and the general public. So obviously that's unbelievable. Anyway.
In terms of limitations, then, I guess the obvious question is, you both suggested where it could take us in the future. And obviously, it's well written that this is a very useful content creation tool at this stage. But what about content analysis? And where are the potential limitations with this, even assuming the advancement? Zach, do you want to take that first?
Well, I mean, I think this, I think that this demos really well. I think that anybody that has played with it and spent a little bit of time realizes there's a long way for it to go before it can do before it can be something meaningful that you want people to rely on in a capacity. I mean, the content creation that people are really talking about is for like search engine optimization purposes. Like, that's what 80% of the apps that have popped up are focusing on, how you can create content for your website and things along those lines. Limitations. I mean, I think that, if you listen to Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, speak, like, they're really sensitive around the future versions of this, claiming that it's so powerful, there's security risks. So I don't know. I mean, limitations in this space, this is, I think they're kind of all over the place. So I think this is, I think Dan mentioned the pre-call, but there was a meme going around LinkedIn that said it's not ChatGPT that's going to take your job. It's going to be the person that knows how to use it. So I think it's this tool that's going to help people do things more efficiently, more, and will save an extraordinary amount of time. But I think there's a lot of limitations, and I think we got a long way to go before it's relied on in a meaningful way for meaningful activities.
Absolutely. Dan, anything further to add?
Well, I just sort of wrote some notes down. I mean, obviously, I think the starting point is should start off for the foreseeable future as a humans in the loop scenario all the way. So the question is, I use the tool, I know the area, and I can complete some task in some greater amount of time, but I can also, you know, check for source hallucination and kind of any sort of model contamination. So people need to learn to use the tools. This is going to be part of the arc of kind of adoption, is people don't, you know, you see a lot on the internet, people like give it this impossible question, it doesn't get it right, or it, you know, and they say, oh, it's like, well, what am I to conclude from that? Like, I know that. I mean, we already know it doesn't. No, I mean, maybe people say it's perfect, but that's a ridiculous proposition. But the question is, what tasks can it be useful for, and how do you connect humans or services to a product and like solve people's problems? The last thing I would say is like more of a deployment question is, you know, one of the things I do is I teach legal ethics. So there is a question about like, what information can I put into a model that a third-party SaaS application that isn't hosted within our environment, you know, that is explicitly essentially vacuuming up all the queries and putting it back into the model. Like it says, it's not like a theory. They tell you this, don't put anything in here that's sensitive, right? Right when you sign up for an account. So.
And I don't know if you've watched.
That's a good question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if you've I've kind of caught some of this evolution where asked the legal questions right when it came out, kind of gave me some answers. Now they're even getting a response, we can't give legal advice. And then on top of that, you see, you know, first the warning came like you described, now even in the thing, it's like, do not put confidential information. I mean, so it's, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the question will be, what is the nanoization of some other model that comes to market, and how is that going to get deployed inside, say, a law firm or corporate legal, or corporate broadly? I think that's what you might anticipate is the kind of infosec and you know,
data protection.
We want to use it. Yeah, the confidentiality of the information is still a very open question, but I believe we're going to get past that. We have to. It's just, again, because this is like a moving terrain. That's a big asterisk, I think, for a lot of law use cases is. I wouldn't be putting like all my information in any third-party SaaS application that's client confidential. So that's going to get solved. Just ultimately, this is not. It's just a kind of at this little moment we're in. Let's put an asterisk around that. At least my reading of at least the U.S. ethics rules is that's going to be a little bit of a questionable exercise. But you know, you do you.
Well, and I think there's a global risk as well, isn't there? That if you're taking data from many data subjects who are adopted all around the world, who are each subject to local data protection regulation, then actually you might be feeding upon information which you don't have a right to as well. So yeah, I can see all kinds of potential pitfalls and hurdles that will need to be overcome from an ethical standpoint. Okay, I want to take a couple of questions in the chat that have come up as we go, following on from this one here, because I think we've covered the one above. There's been an interest in explainable AI, but tools like ChatGPT appear to ingest enormous amounts of data and synthesize and generate answers without any traceability of the basis for the answer that is given to the user. At the end of the day, is that sufficient or something that can really be relied upon for professional work? Zach, do you want to take that?
You know, I mean, it probably depends what you're doing now. I mean, if you're doing absolutely nothing, is something better than nothing? Sure. I mean, if you're looking for advice from an attorney, is this a replacement? No, you know what I mean? So I think that, I think that, no, I think in general, it's very difficult to rely on this. I agree with what Dan was suggesting, you know, this concept of it's a powerful tool. It's a powerful human in the loop tool right now, but it's, you know, it's early.
Moving on to the next one. As LLMs get more sophisticated, the quantum of data required to fine-tune such models seems to be decreasing. While right now there is value in curating structured data, when do you think it will lose relevance and thereby challenge existing legal tech solutions? Part of the context of this question is also from the perspective of how difficult it has been to sell existing legal tech solutions to lawyers, while not in the case of ChatGPT. Dan?
Well, I believe relevant curated data. I mean, I just put another paper out where that's my point of view, kind of summarizing NLP and law broadly, and it's sort of like people kind of ask, is a general model going to beat a domain model? A general model can beat a domain model if the general model is 2 or 10 orders of magnitude larger. But if you gave me 2 models of sort of equal scale, the one that has domain information is likely to outperform the one that doesn't, the one that's tuned to the problem at hand. Very much like a human, by the way. I mean, the neural architecture is based on this neural net between your ears, and all of us who get training on something tend to do better on the task. I mean, generally, that's what you hope, than just somebody who has general knowledge. And so I don't think that's going away. But the problem is, if you have a tool that's based on a very low amount, like a low resolution amount of, like a low scale amount of data, you can get overwhelmed by something that has enormous scale. So you do have to kind of at least meet the kind of ante from a scale perspective. Can I respond to one other thing I saw in the chat? I agree with Nick's point about OpenAI. This is exactly what they need to work out in terms of not having information sucked up into the model. But I guess what I was responding to is, you see a bunch of existing legal tech companies that say they're going to build straight on top of GPT 3.5, not through the Azure environment, but just straight up. And I'm not clear as to how that is going to work. They just need to have an answer for this question, more than an answer, a verifiable, trust but verify is going to be the modus operandi for this type of thing, it seems to me. Again, something that can be worked out, but it's going to be an objection that people have, and a reasonable objection in my view. Anyway, back over to you.
Okay, well, there's a question there requesting that we talk about something other than ChatGPT, which I think is probably a question posed by everyone on the internet at the moment as well. I guess before we move on, any final comments, thoughts, points on the subject that we haven't covered? Open to either of you.
No, I think we've done quite a bit on that. It's not the only thing going on in the world, although like you said, to look at my LinkedIn feed, you wouldn't believe that to be true. Yeah, anyway.
I guess one final question on that. What have you seen in terms of practical use? I mean, Zach, I think the court judgment summary example you gave earlier was a really interesting use case. Any use cases that either of you have seen online or anywhere that seem to kind of strike out, perhaps not necessarily just in the legal sphere?
I mean, preparing for today, just for kicks, I wrote in, what are the top trends in legal tech? And it's funny because I forgot what came back, but it was everything you would have thought of from a year and a half ago. And it's because it was trained on 2021 data, contract analytics, contract automation. It was kind of, no, for me, look, I've used it. I'm writing a blog post or two right now about characteristics, things that we look for in entrepreneurs, and I ping it just to say, hey, what are the 10 things how would the general internet respond back to something like this, as I'm framing the categories that I'm dropping things into. So I think that it's a prompt right now, that going back to that human, I'm not relying on it for anything, but it's a nice prompt and it helps me write a little bit faster. It helps me ideate a little bit. So.
Dan?
Well, I've seen, again, if you keep this human in the loop idea, the ability to at least begin to draft a document, the ability to do machine summarization. I've been surprised we haven't seen more machine summarization tools in our sphere, because, you think about what a lot of lawyers do, it's take a bunch of information and do some compression of that. And we have ways of doing it with an army of associates as the typical model, with some information extraction layered on top. So, the question is, how good of a machine summarization can I have? Medium, but I can get it right now. And then what you really wanted to say is, why is that in the summary? What is the source that makes that in the summary versus something else? This is where you're going to see these kind of enablement layer tools on top of these large language models that allow you to kind of reverse interrogate this sort of sources for, whether it's summarization or source fidelity broadly. So summarization, drafting documents, drafting things like emails. Again, as long as you have the the kind of infosec / confidentiality piece kind of under wraps, then you can see where a lot of us are swimming in a lot of like high cognitive tasks and just stuff I got to get done, which does not necessarily require, it doesn't need to be like bulletproof, just needs to get completed. Just like a reasonable email, a reasonable document I draft, and then I can touch it up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Zach, to your point about it relying on old data, I gather that it still thinks Boris Johnson is our current serving prime minister, which obviously I guess is unfortunate how things have turned since then.
The funniest thing that I saw was somebody said, who's the CEO of Twitter? And it said Elon Musk. And I watched a thread play out and it said, well, how did you know that if you were trained on data from 2020? So I'm sure there's some things they've kind of snuck in there a little bit. But I think the interesting part is if you ask it, the summarization works, I believe, well. That's the first example. I just saw a demo of that yesterday. But I think the way that you can understand where this is at is if you ask it the same question 3 times in a row, if you ask the same question on different days, or if 2 people ask it the same question, you can get dramatically different results, even if both of you are logging into it for the first time. And, there's a data point there, that you wouldn't want to see dramatically different results for the exact same question. And it's not like one is better than the other or is more, or, is improved on the other. It's just, it approaches.
Well, and particularly if you're thinking about it in a legal context and the need for precedent and predictability and a proven chain of custody with respect to evidence and so on, absolutely, yeah, I can see the quandary you find yourself in if ultimately the same input at the same time yields completely different results. I mean, I suppose also following that, often 2 lawyers approach the same problem in very different ways and offer very different advice.
There you go. You see, this is the issue. I don't think that the lack of consistency is necessarily reflective of a failure. It's that also, I just should say one more time, ChatGPT is like a thing. It's like a demo. It's a great way to describe it. Isn't the real tool, the industrial tool people would use. The temperature parameter, if you play with it, increases the amount of randomness you get back. So you're going to get more of this kind of 30 different responses to the same question. If you dial that down, you don't. But then, sometimes you actually want to see, hey, give me 3 perspectives on this problem. That could actually be the use case, in which case you want to play with that. You can also do prompt engineering, hyperparameter optimization, and a bunch of stuff if you're working in the industrial tool. The other thing is just to show people the art of the possible. And then they treat it more. I mean, I think this is what he means when Sam Altman meant when he says this, is don't take it too seriously in the chat version of it, because that's just an example of what's possible. If you want to build an industrial application, you might want to use the thing that's for the industrial, kind of for industrial use. But anyway, that's that again, we should probably transition off this, otherwise it'll be the full 90 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. So I guess maybe Zach, I'll start with you in terms of other legal tech trends, and maybe the way into that from your perspective is where you're seeing investment and the types of companies that are getting a lot of funding or a lot of interest at the moment. Outside of this sphere, what are the big legal tech trends? Again, setting aside what OpenAI provided from 2 years ago, but that we're seeing this year.
Well, I think the big trends that we're seeing this year are the ones OpenAI suggested from 2 years ago. And that's because if you're just asking for trends, if you would Google this, you'd see a lot about contract automation, you'd see a lot about contract analytics. And the reason that you would see them is those are the things that are understandable to most of the venture funds across the globe. Everybody deals with contracts in some capacity. Everybody knows that corporates have a lot of contracts. So I think that those things, that continuously is pushing forward and will attract a lot of dollars. And I think that, we're looking for things a little bit, as I mentioned, those other concepts that we're looking for, really paying attention to what's coming out of Arizona, what's coming out of Utah. There's, what happens when you democratize access to who can participate in the profits of a law firm means kind of a different level of business acumen goes on to some of these law firms or some of these companies effectively. So, historically, there's been a disconnect between the general world of ad tech and how leads are generated for cases as a function of, you couldn't own the end product or you couldn't participate in the revenue stream. But when those walls come down, the whole world from ad tech can now participate in, the value, the participation in a contingency fee. And we think there's going to be like really interesting business models that pop up as you democratize access for who can participate in those streams. So that's kind of a big one. And then, we're talking to a lot of things that historically would have been called legal tech that are now being called sales enablement tools. And the more that you can sell into the sales department, but also solve a legal department's need, maybe these companies can kind of gain some adoption and distribution a little bit quicker than has historically been seen in this space. So those are kind of the trends that, along with how you think about AI. I mean, those are the things that that's what we're like fascinated to talk to entrepreneurs about, and and having some pretty awesome conversations these days.
Great, thank you. In terms of the alternative income streams, so the second of those two trends that you described, are there any particular market sectors or spheres where people are interested in being able to operate in that capacity?
Well, I think part of it is, if you can layer on a little bit of technology, there are spheres for underrepresented folks in the legal space. Whatever the $1 trillion a year spent on legal services is, probably to the top, I'm making up a number here, 5-10% of society. So we look at some of this stuff saying it's not really trying to compete with attorneys for work. It's really like opening up the market to people that just don't have access to some of these systems. So, we've seen a couple things that are helping like super small businesses almost act as like a general counsel in some way. And how do you take some technology, add some human in the loop type of stuff, and kind of provide services there? And then there's lots of things that are just helping people with basic workflows. We invested in a company called Solo Suit that is, when people get sued by a debt collector, it's helping people saying, how can we help you file a response to that case? And that's something that like there's no set of attorneys that are really helping people when they get sued for $1,000 or $500. So we think it's really additive, and it's spaces that like we haven't really seen in the, we haven't really seen these end customers have options before. So I think these are almost like new markets we're going into.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose I could draw a parallel with the litigation funding world there to some degree, and particularly the rise that we're seeing in class actions across Europe and in the UK as well, whereby investors are recognizing the contingency upside by bringing more plaintiffs to the fore in order to quantify claims that otherwise.
And that's not even what I was referring to, but that's a whole nother area. Yeah, there's stuff like that as well that's happening. And again, areas that technology can play a key role in evaluating, the value of a case, what, where the investment should be made, how you acquire the leads, there's lots of opportunity in all of these areas.
Absolutely. Well, and I suppose also to link it back to being able to use some modeling to identify potential outcomes within cases, then you as an investor can make some savvy decisions about the realms that you want to get into and fund, where there's, perhaps in the right court with the right judge, you're going to have X percentage chance of getting the right outcome, and therefore channeling, again, it's somewhat of a cynical business approach to law rather than the access to justice type case that you were presenting. But I think it's probably...
I mean, just for clarity, we're not an investor in that. We're not investing in the litigation. We're not a funder. We're investing in software companies. But Look, the other thing I would say is that almost any software is bring down the cost of a legal case. I mean, that's one thing, whether, I think there's almost any, and if these are if you want to have, in the examples you just gave, if you want to have an associate do an extraordinary amount of work and be billing the client at, $300 to $500 an hour, or if technology can replace that for, $20. So, I look at it and say, you have every piece of technology here is helping on this access side. And whether it's, and even we've invested, you can go to an attorney right now and you can start a company and it can charge you $3,000 to $5,000 to incorporate. Or there's automated tools that are coming out that can help you incorporate a company for $180. So, is that while that may not look like something that's an access to justice type of thing, well, maybe that's opening up entrepreneurship to more people because they can do things along these lines. So, I think it's very broad, but I think that specifically for the stuff, yeah, it's not just about it's not a, in some cases it is a zero-sum game where maybe the client paying for some expense and now that expense has been reduced significantly. And then on the flip side, we're not, the technologies that we're seeing, we've never seen anybody saying we're trying to replace this role. Like they're trying to help a role do more productive work. An example that I always have in the back of my mind is this was a little bit before my time, but when ATMs came out, everything I heard was, that's the end of the bank branch. That's the end of, there will be no more banks. There will no more bank tellers. And what's happened is you've increased banks by like 20x since that stage. And yes, there may be less bank tellers, but every one of those banks now has loan officers, now has, more higher type of skill jobs. So I think that this is the exact same, I think we have the opportunity to do the exact same types of things here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, in terms of job satisfaction as well, someone that's trained for many years in order to become a qualified lawyer, who then has to spend their day in, day out just looking at documents to say relevant, not relevant. It's not what they want to be doing with their qualified time either.
We have an investment in a company called Simply Agree, automating closing binders after a transaction. So a transaction gets done. You have all these papers, all these e-signatures. How do you get them all into the right format? This is stuff that the lawyers don't get paid for. They don't get to bill for it. And it takes somebody, in some cases, hours or days of work to clean these things up. The software just goes like that. Like nobody's, it just enables people to do the things that they want to spend their time on.
Absolutely. Dan, in terms of, either further commentary on some of the trends that Zach's discussed or identified, or other trends that you're seeing this year that you think are worthy of note, over to you.
Well, you guys already mentioned litigation funding. I wrote that down. I think that's a field that really can get a lot more rigorous than it is today. The nature of how claims are valued and the kind of margins that people make in the area, it's ripe for competition with a kind of a more rigorous sort of financial treatment. If you look at what happened in the Muddy Waters versus Burford debate, so Muddy Waters is a short fund that basically, said, hey, Burford's overvalued and here's our reasons why, and they wrote a report about it. And really the debate is like, what is the long-term value of the income stream or the litigation assets? And this was a debate about like, how do you value these assets? And I think it reveals what's already true about the whole sector, which is that it's not nearly as rigorous as the rest of finance. And it operates in a context where if there was more competition, there'd be margin compression. They just wouldn't make as much per transaction, but it'd still be, you might even see more deals move because of that. So I see that's a place where kind of technology can, there already is some degree of underwriting, but it could go way up in terms of it really could be much more rigorous. And I expect that to be a trend that'll play out over the next few years. Let's see. I do think, and I'd be interested in in Zach's point of view on this is in terms of, what's happening in the broader capital markets. Obviously, we've gone from like 0/negative interest rates to, whatever, 3 or 4% Fed funds rate. So that obviously, the most speculative investments go first in those types of scenarios when you see that. I think that, and we've seen obviously some of the companies that IPO'd in legal tech in 2021 have been quite appropriately, in my view, brought back to earth in terms of their valuation. But I mean, that's a kind of an item on the table is what is that all going to mean? I think certainly going to get another funding round for some of these companies when they've had sky high valuations, and it's going to be a little hard to imagine how they're going to get. I mean, there's not perhaps tons of appetite to give money to a company that's been valued at a level where it's just pretty hard to rationalize. But I just kind of wonder what your point of view on it, since you're the one putting money on it.
Yeah, glad that. I mean, I think that you said the most speculative assets are the ones that usually money dries up for it. Yeah, and I think there's kind of there's a reverse correlation there that includes stage. So what happens is, as you said, the public markets took a beating, and let's skip the legal tech for a second. Just public technology companies got
absolutely
destroyed.
Right.
So what that reflects is, at the end of the day, those companies are generating revenue or earnings in some capacity, and their valuation, some sort of multiple, that valuation compresses. And what you can do is take that multiple, and if you're an earlier stage company, you can look up to that multiple and say, that's our full potential. And our full potential, and the ones that are closest to the IPO market are the ones that can look and say, okay, well, what are we going to generate in revenue in the next year or two? That's our multiple. That's what our valuation, that's the maximum it can be. So I think what happens is you've seen that pre-IPO space almost get slaughtered.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the ones that were building the valuations because they were looking to the higher multiples, and all of those funds that are playing in these massive checks, they're the ones that have pulled back significantly. And what's happened is, because they don't want to put more money to work in those companies, because they'll have to do it at a down round that'll effectively mark down their early, and there's a whole negative crowd. But when that happens, and for the ones that were just plowing through money, they have serious problems. Now, for our space, when we've put out numbers in the past, and we almost slowed back on doing them because they were so skewed by the bigger deals. When companies raise a couple $100 million, you add them together, you're like, holy crap, these numbers are insane. But so what we've seen is that stuff dry up. But what's happening is, as these funds don't want to deploy there, they push down into earlier stages. So we've seen the pre-public, the E's, the D's, the Series C's, all of that stuff dry up significantly. But we are seeing some of these funds, as a way to keep active, go a little bit earlier. And, because they used to write checks for 200 million, and now they're writing Series B checks to $10 million. They're not as rigorous necessarily when it comes to valuation metrics, because, if you're making a $200 million bet, you got to analyze but if you're making a $10 million bet, and that is reflective of a very small percent of your fund, it's like they're just making some bets. But what's happening is all that money is kind of coming downstream. So we play in this stream of inception through a Series A, your pre-seed, your seed, your post-seed, your pre-A, and your Series A. And what we are seeing is that a year and a half ago, any entrepreneur within reason could have gotten funding. Now that has dried up, where people
even not in reason were getting funding at times. Now that's a joke.
No, and on top of that, I mean, and that was also coming from people's neighbors that were doctors that wanted to invest in something that looks a little bit different than the stock market. So, and if you put ideas on the table from like 1 to 10, you were seeing the same valuations for one's the best, for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1s. And now I would basically say the ones, not much has changed. The twos, you're seeing some price sensitivity there and valuations coming down. The threes are lucky if they get funded. The fours and fives, there's no funding anymore for them. But that being said, when I say the ones, I mean, these are the people that have, that have good founder market fit. They understand the problem. They understand that people are willing to pay for this stuff. They're coming at this with like a capital efficiency metric that's changed, where they're like looking at unit economics and saying, hey, we're going to buy this widget for $1 and sell it for $2, and it's positive unit economics. And then they're kind of like demonstrating success along those ways, and they're starting to build some good companies. So, I think that yes, there was a lot more of it a year or two ago, but I think that like what's going to flush out at the other end is probably going to be the same. And I think that it's really.
I'm very happy about this because there's been so many people in the space, in a sense, that they just distract from like the things that I think are more viable in the long run. But like the customers like can't make heads or tails because they're getting 4,000 marketing emails and they're like overwhelmed, and they're like, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And so I don't think this is net negative. I think this is a positive thing. It's bad if you're stuck in one of these situations. But like, if you said what's good overall, I mean, I think you probably agree. It's actually better if we don't have everybody get money, even if the idea is really not viable. It would be better if you did it, actually.
And it's better for those entrepreneurs too. Like
go back to the drawing board. Go back to the drawing board.
Exactly. Because what we've seen is entrepreneurs that really want to be entrepreneurs, and they're willing to like, you continuously iterate and you figure things out. But the fact that there was just easy, an entrepreneur come with crappy idea, raise a couple $1 million, be stubborn with the idea. And yeah, we're seeing all those companies come back saying they're out of capital and they need help. Yeah. But
follow on question, Zach, and it's related to one that was in the chat. But how does that affect M&A activity amongst legal tech companies? And again, are you seeing it dependent on size and value of company?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, that valuation paradigm, right? When companies acquire, if companies are acquiring companies, they're usually doing it to say, hey, 1 + 1 is going to be greater than 3. So they have to pay for that, or 1 + 2 is going to be greater than 3. So when they buy that number 2 company, they have to pay something that gives them the flexibility to make the overall entity value higher. And if their valuations come down, so you see price sensitivity there as well. There's this concept of like an acqui-hire market that will heat up because all these companies will have no place to go. And some bigger companies will say, hey, this is a vehicle for us to add some talent to our team. But I think that, like, again, if people are building, we're seeing a couple of great businesses within our portfolio, and they're kind of just moving forward and doing their thing and keeping heads down. And then one other thing on legal in general that's been kind of good and bad to watch is just a lot of the companies in or around the litigation, or so like litigation seems like it's almost going to accelerate in the next couple of years. So it's almost like counter cyclical, to kind of some of the rest of the economic conditions. So
bankruptcy is probably going to be heading in a good direction also, not for the people, but for the practice area, right? I mean,
and look, that's what people say about law firms, right? In good times, it's M&A deals, and bad times, it's bankruptcy, and that's why you
got to do the rotation. That's it. Oh no, that person's not a M&A associate. They're a bankruptcy associate now. we just knighted them at the water cooler. So there you go.
Exactly. So anyway, we're an early stage investor, and we've been deploying capital for about 2 years. So our companies, I think there are a lot of challenges to some of these companies that raise a ton of money, don't have solid unity, don't really have a grasp on their unit economics, and have been burning through a lot of capital. Fortunately, our companies that's not the profile of companies we invest in, nor are any of our companies at that stage where that would affect them. So I think that there's a lot of pain being felt in the later stages. In the earlier stages, companies with decent ideas that are validated through customers, it seems like we're very excited, and, shameless plug, go to LegalTech.com and reach out to us. But so yeah, for us, we're really excited about what we're seeing, and we're really excited to deploy some capital in the next year or two.
Excellent. Dan, I know that you kind of threw that to Zach halfway through a list of other trends that you were citing.
Sorry, I took away your role. I apologize.
Wait, can I take James? Can I take it away for one more sec? James, can I take it away for one more second?
Yeah, please, fire away.
I shamelessly plugged, what we're doing, but Dan, I have anything you're talking about publicly with 273?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to build. I mean, we're doing data integration in the enterprise space and trying to connect a lot of disparate data sources. For maybe you want to use an LLM, maybe you just want to like solve a more narrow problem. So we see that as a persistent issue. So one way people solve that is they buy 17 companies and staple gun them together and call it a platform. But the more plausible version, as I see it, is people are just going to license all this stuff, and there needs to be some connective tissue to pull them all together, and that's what we're working on. Putting all the data together in some reasonable way. So it's infrastructure. It's a little bit boring, but it's helpful because it's usually the conduit to solving the ultimate problem somebody wants to do. So that's kind of like that's kind of what we're working on right now. Again, we're just getting going. We just started in November, so that's. But I do see that as a trend. Maybe one other thing to say, we have seen a lot of consolidation in a sense. Now, some of it's being done under favorable conditions. Some will be done on less favorable conditions, in the sense that the company's kind of teetering, but they can sell it for something. And so they do an exit. That's one version of the story. The other one is, obviously they're bought under good conditions for the company, but I would expect that to also accelerate, because you have companies alone who, combined with something else, probably there's more value if you streamline and did. I don't know what your thoughts are, but like I would expect to see more of that in the next 12 to 24 months. Is company X and company Y are put together either under duress or under other conditions that are favorable to the parties. I don't know.
I agree. And actually, I unfortunately have to jump. I have a hard stop, but I want to thank everybody for this. This has been pretty awesome. And, if I can be helpful to anybody on this call, anybody listening, Zach at LegalTech.com, ZACH at LegalTech.com.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Dan. I guess we'll wrap it up. Have a good evening, afternoon, good day. Good to see you.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.